Recent images that have come out of a Sikh Vaisakhi Day celebration in Calgary showing the glorification of Talwinder Singh Parmar, the mastermind of the Air India bombing, Canada's worst terrorist attack, as some sort of martyr, raised the eyebrows of many Canadians. It wasn't just because this celebration was attended by what appears to be thousands of Canadians, but Canadian politicians were in attendance as well, including the RCMP and the Canadian military, who are holding recruiting events at this celebration. The murder of Khalistani activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar last year outside of his Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia, kicked off a firestorm of protests, which culminated in Justin Trudeau making the rather large accusation that India was behind the killing of Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Since that accusation, tensions between Canada and India have reached their lowest point. The nucleus for this major international scandal, playing out really in Canadian streets, is the Global Khalistan movement. And our next guest is what many would consider to be a subject matter expert on Khalistan. Well, joining us now is a man who will be quite familiar to Canadians who have spent time watching the CBC. Terry Milewski is a journalist and former senior correspondent for CBC News, and he's also the author of the 2021 book, Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Movement. Mr. Milewski, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So, obviously this issue about Khalistan and the Khalistan movement has come back into the news cycle after we've seen recent Vaisakhi Day celebrations and Khalsa Day celebrations in this country attended by Canadian politicians. But before we get too deep into the issue, why don't we just begin with having you as a subject matter expert on this explain to us what Khalistan is, because from my perspective, this is a group that is a movement that advocates for a breakaway Sikh state in Punjab. Do I have that right?
Beyond Punjab. Right. Yeah, that is in principle right, but the details are important. They are claiming, according to their latest map, they change according to the whims of those drawing the maps. And there's no sort of established religion on this question, but let's take the group that's organizing the referendum campaign called Sikhs for Justice. They've published a very extensive and ambitious map, which includes not just Punjab, but parts of Haryana, just about all of Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, a couple of other states to boot, and with a capital at Shimla, which is in the state of Himachal Pradesh. So they want more than just Punjab, but they don't want all of Punjab, by which I mean historical Punjab, to include the majority of its territory, which since partition has been in Pakistan. That's Punjab too, historically, and very important to Sikhs as well, to their traditions and to their religion. For example, the city of Lahore was absolutely central to Sikh history and culture, and was the seat of Ranjit Singh's Sikh empire back in the day, a couple of hundred years ago, to which they often hearken back saying, well, we've had our own independent state before, why can't we do it again? And what about Nankana Sahib, which is the birthplace of the father of the Sikh religion, Guru Nanak? They're not claiming that either. So we could go on about this, but it's a big question. Your opening question is a big one. What exactly is Khalistan? Why doesn't it include these sites that are so fundamental, as I say, to Sikh history and culture? And it raises the question, well, it almost answers the question, doesn't it? They don't want to lose the support of Pakistan for the Khalistan enterprise, because Pakistan has always been essential as a base of operations and a source of diplomatic and political support.
I mean, the idea of this being a Canadian issue is strange, of course, because really it's not something that other countries, would usually have to worry about, but it's really become part of the Canadian news cycle, especially recently. And your former employer, the CBC, published an article or a video, I think it was both, that made the case that actually the Khalistan movement is not as strong in India as it is in Canada. Is that correct? Would you agree that it's actually stronger in Canada?
Well, that's not understating it. I mean, I'll give you just a few figures. You can drown in figures on this, but I mean, it's important to get this right. The support for the idea of an independent state called Khalistan, an independent Sikh state, called anything, is in India absolutely microscopic. I'll be specific. In the last two elections, and several before, I won't go too far back, you're allowed to run in India as a separatist, pretty much like in Canada. If you're not threatening violence and you just hold a political view, you can run, and they do. And the last time out, they got 2.5% of the vote and no seats. And the time before that, they got 0.3 of 1%, a fraction of 1%. Nota, which is a category in Indian elections, none of the above, got more than the separatists did I'm talking about elections in the Sikh state of Punjab, which is 58% Sikh. So where is this support, please? One more number. Okay, I'll give you two. One more number. A couple of academics in Alberta did a survey, I guess about a year ago, found 79% of the Sikhs they interviewed thought that the idea of an independent Khalistan was a waste of time. And the Pew Research, a very reputable, I think, international research company that doesn't just go around with a clipboard and say pro or con, they interview people in depth. They interviewed in 2019 and 2020 about 30,000 Indians. Now that's a sample size. And a subset of that, they interviewed the Sikhs of Punjab, where most Sikhs still live to this day. And they found that 95%, I repeat, 95% of the Sikhs in Punjab said that they were very proud to be Indian. That's a quote. Furthermore, a majority of them also said that if you disrespected India, the nation of India, then you weren't a real Sikh. You couldn't be a real Sikh and disrespect India. So, enough numbers. I think my point stands that the idea that has been promulgated these many years, decades now, 40 years in Canada, that the separatists somehow are the authentic voice of the Sikhs. They always say they are. And too many politicians fall for it. Maybe you want to talk about that too, but on this point, the fact of the matter is that far too many politicians have fallen for the idea that the Sikhs want an independent state. No, Khalistanis do, but the Sikhs in general, in the vast majority, don't.
And that was the next question I was going to get into, which is, why do we have Canadian politicians, whether they be Sikh or not, attend these events and speak on stages or take photos standing beside Khalistan flags? I mean, it's not even as though they're trying to make the effort to not be associated with Khalistan. They sometimes are in pictures standing beside people with Khalistan flags. Why do we have this happen in our country? Because again, it just does not really seem like a typical issue that we would have to be dealing with in Canadian politics.
Well, it's a thorny question, isn't it? Because the short answer, I guess, is they do it because everyone does it. I can't criticize you for doing it because you'll turn around and point the finger at me and him too and her too. They all do it. So it makes it very difficult, doesn't it, for any one party to criticize another. That's one thing. More broadly, though, I mean, it's a case of ignorance, lack of curiosity, because you will find that many politicians don't appreciate the difference between Sikhs and Khalistanis. It's as though, and it's literally this dumb, to give you an example. People are not familiar with this, but they should be in Canada. If I said that I was against, say, drunk driving, and you said, you're biased against drivers, people would say, no, he's just against the drunks. You're crazy. That's not a bias against all drivers. He said he's against drunk drivers.
Right.
That, as stupid as it is exactly what's happening, and egged on by the Khalistanis in Canada. That's exactly what's happening, is that if you say you disapprove, if you don't want to stand there with the Khalistan flags, then people will say, you're a racist. You'll be called a racist, I can guarantee you that, and anti-Sikh, as though the Sikhs are all Khalistanis, which they're not. But let me add just one more point before I shut up, and that is that standing next to a Khalistan flag doesn't bother me. We have freedom of speech. Fly the flag, march down the street and say, Khalistan Zindabad, long live Khalistan. Fine with me. I'm for free speech. Why not? And Canada has adopted that position for many years. The problem is a separate one. It's not about the flags. That's an expression of political opinion which may be controversial but hardly fatal. It's the pictures, the martyr pictures of the mass murdering terrorists who are held up as models for Sikh youth, martyrs of the Sikh nation, leaders, men that we should look up to include the ubiquitous portrayal of Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber of 1985, who slaughtered 331 completely innocent civilians who had nothing whatsoever to do with his battle for Khalistan, and is revered today as a Shahid Jatidar, a leader and a martyr. That is the glorification of terrorism and an incitement which should not be allowed, in my view.
I was just going to lead to that part, which is the fact that you have Talwinder Singh Parmar, the Air India bombing mastermind, be glorified at these events where Canadian politicians are present, where the military and the RCMP are recruiting. It does send a very strange message. And the question I have about this is why is this? Why is a man like Parmar glorified at these events and glorified by Khalistanis? I'm assuming that not all Sikhs glorify this man, but of course Khalistanis clearly do. Why is that the case? And I'm pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but I think you were interviewing Jagmeet Singh, and when he was, or maybe when he had just conceded that Parmar was behind the Air India bombing, for a while he didn't agree that Parmar was actually the mastermind.
Yeah, it was kind of the other way around. It was I think the day after he won the leadership, and he did not acknowledge that Parmar did blow up Air India, and he did not condemn the display of martyr posters glorifying this mass murdering terrorist, Canada's worst ever mass murderer, given 5 opportunities to do so in that interview. And it took 5 months to correct his view. He eventually came around to saying that it was a very fair question, and that, he now understood that Parmar was indeed the author of the Air India bombing. But you're asking about why does this happen? And the answer is that because if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, is the old expression. So back in the day when I first started wailing about this 20 years ago, they would put little 8x10 pictures on the parade floats in the Baisakhi parade going by, and these pictures would show their famous martyrs, the assassins of Indira Gandhi, the assassins of General Vaidya, who led the Indian army at the Golden Temple in '84, the assassins of Bayant Singh, the chief minister of Punjab, who put an end to the insurgency in '95, and so on. They looked around and they saw that nobody said anything about it. Nobody objected to the display of these pictures. So the next year they came back with bigger pictures, and the next year they came back with a life-size glamour photo with ornate ceremonial sword and sky-high turban of Parmar fixed permanently to the outside wall of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. So, having done all of that for years, who's going to come along now and say, well, my party and his party and her party, we've all blown it. We've all made a mistake here. And we should stop showing up if these events are going to show those pictures. Imagine the impact. They think that they might lose votes. What they're afraid of, Canadian politicians have always been afraid that if they are the exception and they step up and say, I'm not going to go to your Vaisakhi parade if you're going to show these appalling pictures. This is a disgrace. And I'm going to bet that I can win more votes by opposing it than I can by looking the other way, as they routinely do at Vaisakhi parades. I think that impact would be considerable, and I think there might even be a rush of other politicians to join in. There's one more thing, and I'm sorry to go on this question. It's another key question. And that is that there's always an excuse that has been offered by the Khalistanis when you ask, why are you doing this? This is revolting. This is a disgrace. They say, but he's innocent. And a lot of politicians grab that excuse and run with it. Well, there's no consensus, they say to me. They say he didn't do it. Well, I'm afraid after the Air India trial, that just won't wash. It's bolted down. It's nailed down every which way. I won't get started. Don't get me started, I advise you, on the extent of the concrete, hard evidence, sworn and tested in public in both a criminal trial and a couple of other criminal trials and a judicial inquiry, about 10 years all put together of judicial examination of these facts. And I do mean facts. Show that this excuse that, he was innocent, he didn't do it. The Indian government blew up their own plane. That's sort of conspiracy nonsense. Nonsense is what it is. But that helps to keep the politicians in the fold, right? It gives them an excuse. Well, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. So what's your beef?
Well, beside the pictures of Parmar as a shaheed, they also have Hardeep Singh Nijjar as a martyr at these events as well. And for Canadians who've been following this, that name may sound familiar. He was the Gurdwara leader who was gunned down in Surrey last year, I believe it was. And the Canadian government accused the Indian government of being behind the assassination. And there were a group of four men who have just been charged with that murder. Now, we've been told, Terry, that this man was either a terrorist leader or he was a plumber. And from your position, which was he? Who really was Hardeep Singh Nijjar?
Well, he wasn't much of a plumber. He didn't seem to be working at it full time, and he wasn't much of a terrorist either, because the Indians never managed to produce the kind of evidence that I just spoke of in my previous answer. In the case of the Air India bombing and all years of examination, we've got the evidence up, down, and sideways of his guilt and of those who assisted in his enterprise. With Nijjar, he's accused in the Ludhiana cinema bombing, and so he's accused of a lot of things. And traditionally, just as Canada has fallen short in responding to Indian requests for the rendition of wanted terrorists, as the Indians call it, Canada has fallen short. Canada refused an Indian request to extradite Parmar, the Air India bomber, in 1982, when Pierre Trudeau was in office, for the murder of 2 policemen in Punjab. So, we're not talking about handing out leaflets. We're talking about serious criminal activity. And Canada said no. So Canada has fallen short in responding to Indian requests, but India has also fallen short in assuming that, just because they say, well, we want him, he's a terrorist. Yeah, but where's your evidence? And very often they have failed to produce what would convince either a Canadian or British or American courts. They've had a problem all over the world, in fact, in getting these people sent back to India because of the lack of evidence that they offer.
want to go back to the political element to this, because I think that's probably the most important aspect of this, the fact that this movement seems to have a pretty strong grip on Canadian politics, at least from my perspective. Who is behind the funding of the Khalistan movement? Who funds, for example, the World Sikh Organization and these other groups that seem to be, involved in our local politics?
Well, I think they fund themselves. I think it's very easy. The Indians will often tell you, again, they sort of cut to the chase without a whole lot of evidence. They say, right. Well, Pakistan pays for it all, don't you know? Maybe they do. I don't have hard evidence. It's very hard for me to look into their internal finances. They certainly have supported the movement every which way: training, medical care, weapons, refuge, safe haven. Where did Parmar go when the police closed in after the Air India bombing? He ran to Pakistan. He spent the last 3 years of his life mainly in Pakistan. So it's always been a haven. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Pakistan finances groups like Sikhs for Justice. So I simply don't have evidence to make that statement. But I don't think it's particularly important because they've got plenty of money themselves. They don't have any problem. I mean, you got a keyboard, got a computer, you can be big on the internet. I mean, it's not as though they're spending a lot of money. They're not fielding a military.
Right.
They are internet warriors. They're keyboard warriors. And they do a great job of that. And it doesn't need a lot of financing. You don't need the Pakistani ISI shoveling money into an enterprise that costs very little.
Do you think that this Khalistani issue in Canadian politics, maybe it's the glorification of terrorists like we've seen with Parmar, is this going to be a permanent fixture of Canadian politics going forward?
Well, I very much hope not, because, as I say, it only takes one brave politician. Well, it wouldn't necessarily have to be very brave, in truth. But, I mean, you mentioned the recent Khalsa Day celebration in Toronto. Lots of Khalistan flags, but also posters of Prime Minister Modi of India and Foreign Minister Jaishankar and so on, and the Defense Minister, calling them killers, offering rewards if you go get them, and saying let's besiege Indian embassies and high commissions, offering cash money in rewards for revealing diplomats' home addresses. In other words, threatening their safety, obviously, intentionally undermining their safety, increasing their security bills, that kind of thing. That's what goes along with those nice yellow flags and the cries of Khalistan Zindabad. There's more to it. That I would like to think that eventually a leading politician. There were three at least. Well, at the federal level, the mayor was also there. But at the Toronto Council Day, for example, Pierre Poilievre was there. Didn't say a word against it. So was Jagmeet Singh. It wasn't. The Indians say, "Well, Trudeau's supporting these people. You see how he's smiling while they're chanting Khalistan Zindabad." Well, that's not the problem. Keep your eye on the ball, guys. They're threatening the lives of diplomats and glorifying mass murderers. Worry about that for a change. And I think that if a politician did stand up and make that speech and say, look, I've done this myself. I'm here to tell you that I'm not coming next year. I'm not going to come and have this creeping extremism where it gets worse and worse every year, where, next you'll be calling Parmar a saint. Well, some people already do.
Right.
I'm not going to be coming to your Vaisakhi parade if that's how you intend to behave. And watch that politician win the votes of the rest of the Indian diaspora. There are more of them than there are Khalistanis, I guarantee you.
And the last question I have for you, Terry, is this. From our perspective, we've seen a major surge in our population, especially from India and particularly from, in particular, Punjab. Does it not benefit India to get rid of people who might be anti-Indian, the anti-Indian government, and get rid of people who might be more prone to the Khalistani cause, and send them to Canada than to have them in our and have them in their country? Do you think there's an element of them wanting to actually incentivize people like that out of India and into Canada?
I actually don't believe that, for the simple reason that the Indian government does not like it much at all.
Right.
When somebody that they would like to put in prison escapes their jurisdiction, goes to Canada, and continues to foment hell for his former country. And they're very bitter about that. And they say that Canada shouldn't be letting these people in. The Foreign Minister Jaishankar said as much in so many words just a couple of weeks ago. It goes along with more of the exaggeration, I should say, by the Indian side of just how terrible some of these people are. Some of them are terrible, but we know of 4 who are now charged with murder that came apparently as students and didn't seem to do a whole lot of studying, did they? Right. In fact, I don't think they ever went to school at all. So both, you can blame both sides. The Indians for letting them go, the Canadians for taking them in. Fine, blame them all. But I don't think that's the real issue between the two countries. The Indians are still stuck on their traditional point of view. They don't share our definition of freedom of speech, and we don't share their definition of terrorism. For example, Sikhs for Justice is banned in India as a terrorist organization, and its leader Gurpatwant Singh Panun, the target of the principal target before Nijjar of the assassination plot, he's also branded as a terrorist, as was Nijjar. Well, if they could come up with good hard evidence, they might find they'd have better luck getting the Western democracies to give these people up. But that's the real issue between the decision, apparently, by some people in the Indian government, with or without official sanction. That's an argument still to be had. Right. The decision to decide to go after them in Canada and in the United States and elsewhere, by the way, there's about maybe a dozen or so that have died under mysterious circumstances in Pakistan. But the decision to go after these people and wipe them out in these kind of semi-official hit squads, that's, we still don't know exactly how much we can pin on the top levels of the Indian government. But I can tell you that the Canadian government, and to a similar extent, the United States government, is quite convinced that it went very high up indeed, the approval for these killings. That's the real issue right now, isn't punks who aren't showing up at school with student visas. It's murder squads going around in the Western democracies, wiping out, well, who? People that they've decided they don't like because they think they're a terrorist and they couldn't produce enough evidence.
It seems like a real unnecessary disaster for our country to be in, but again, one that needs to be reported and discussed. And so, Mr. Milewski, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us on this issue.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.